Well, thanks for the invite today to come over and speak to you about Inveresk. It's quite a nice opportunity to talk about a site locally. We normally talk about things having at a great distance. So just before we start looking at Inveresk, have a quick chat about the project. The project's called Seeing Beneath the Ground. We started the project in summer 2020. It originally was supposed to be a 3-year project, but as many things, COVID got in the way of the fieldwork aspect of it. So we were lucky enough to extend it to 5 years. Historic Scotland Foundation funded the project with a grant. And the aims of the project is to embed geophysical survey within a heritage recording service. That's the team I work within, through the training and the acquisition of equipment. Before this project started, has had no geophysical survey capabilities that made it very difficult as an organisation for us to provide advice on how to use this sort of equipment in the field. So part of the project is so that we can train people within HES and help other organisations use geophysical survey better. The project funds 2 full-time members of staff and the equipment purchase. And as the project concludes next year, we won't be moving into business as usual. We've had commitment from the organisation to continue the project. Equipment we've got so far, we've got all of the main sorts of geophysical survey equipment available to us. We've got earth resistance meter, a piece of equipment called an electromagnetic sensor that isn't commonly used, but actually we've had some lovely results from that. We have a GPR, and the one in the bottom right is the census gradiometer cart that we did most of the work at Inveresk with. To date, since the start of the project, 28 surveys across Scotland, quite a lot grouped along the Anstine Wall. Again, that was COVID driven as we weren't allowed to travel very far, and we could get there from the office. To date, 26 members of staff working in HES have received geophysical survey training, and we've also worked with 18 members of the public in local archaeological societies to help them understand geophysics and use them on their sites. Okay, just a bit quick background about Roman Inveresk. Some of you, well, I imagine a lot of you will know a lot more about Roman Inveresk than I do. For those who don't know the site, there was a Roman fort established there around 139, 140 that's left of the screen there. 2 phases of occupation, reasonable sized forts, 2.7 hectares. There's been excavations from about 1940s, so just post-war, through to about 2010, intermittently within the fort. To the east of the fort, there's an area of civil settlements, the Vicus. Within that, there's a nice bathhouse located in the back garden of one of the houses. And the bathhouse is fed by an aqueduct system that we'll be looking at later. And the Vicus probably had a triple ditch system to the east of it to offer it protection. The area we worked in is Lewisvale Park, and we worked on the cricket pitch that you can see indicated by the red arrow there. So before we look at the geophysics itself, let's have a quick look at what other evidence we have for the site. So there's an awful lot of crop mark evidence around there. This is an oblique looking roughly northeastish. This is 1964 example, and in the area to the right of the cricket pitch, you can see what's now allotment gardens. You can see the triple ditch system cutting through, and you can see it vaguely going across the cricket pitch there. There's an awful lot of other aerial photos around the site that's been transcribed. We were there because of work that happened at the cricket pavilion. This photo here is before even the first pavilion was built. And around 5 years, 6 years before this, the site was still arable. So actually, since the cricket pitch was built, this has preserved the site from modern agriculture. There doesn't seem to have been a lot of deep ploughing taking place on the site. So we're lucky that the cricket pitch got placed there, as it's preserved the area quite well. If we scroll out a little bit now, again, you can see the forts at the top of the picture and the cricket pitch indicated. Extending to the south of Lewisvale cricket pitch is a field, quite an extensive field system entirely recognised through aerial photography, the transcription of that. The area to the south of this has got absolutely fantastic crop marks. The big yellow thing you can see there is a Cursus monument. There's a Roman temporary camp and this extensive field system. Okay, so why are we at Lewisvale Park? The main reason is because of the AOC excavation that happened there. The original cricket pavilion mysteriously caught fire, and following its fire, a new cricket pavilion was planned. So AOC were contracted to do a topsoil strip to have a look at the site before the new cricket pavilion was built. They found a degree of archaeological deposits there, so it turned into a full excavation. So the square area that you can see on here is literally the footprint of the cricket pavilion, with a little nudge out of the bottom in the area where 2 Roman altars were found. So their excavation identified a series of post holes, 2 ditches you can see cutting through the area obliquely, and in the bottom left-hand corner of their excavation there was a sunken feature that contained 2 Roman altars. Lovely Roman altars that were found there. This is actually a really nice dig. One of the altars was dedicated to Mithras, who's an Iranian god of the sun, and one of the Roman mystery cults. It was popular with the Imperial Army between the 1st and the 4th centuries. The second altar was dedicated to Sol. The combination of these altars in the scooped area led to the interpretation of the site as a possible timber-built mytharium. So then we come to the survey that we recently conducted. We did 3 hectares of gradiometer survey within the park. We did some earth resistance and we did some ground penetrating radar. We use this as an opportunity to provide staff training for 8 members of staff at HES. The site offered the ideal opportunity for us as it was actually within commuted distance from the office, and we could actually use the electric van and some of the electric vehicles to get to the site and back. Normally we have to use diesel vans and that's not very good for the carbon footprint. So it was nice to get an opportunity to commute to a site that we could work at. So the aim of the surveys we undertook were to investigate the area around the cricket pavilion, to test the hypothesis of the mytharium, to see if we could trace the aqueduct across the park. This has been identified as crop marks either to the northwest of the park. So we wanted to see whether we could see that continuing, and to also investigate the triple ditch system. And it had been suggested there was an entrance into the vicus through the triple ditch system within the cricket ground. Okay, so the results we've got here are the main results we have for the site. So this is from the gradiometer survey. So there's some things that are quite obvious. Right in the middle of it, there's the cricket crease. That's the AstroTurf cricket crease. And running across here, that's actually a modern path. The other side, you can see the curve. That's also a modern path, just passing by the cricket pavilion. First thing here that we can see quite clearly is we have the aqueduct running broadly east-west across the site. And interestingly, it's cutting through areas of enclosure that we'll talk about shortly. And the ditch system to the west of the site, we can identify it's partly obscured by the modern path, but we can actually just about see the 3 ditches. The first, which runs here crossing this down, and then the second 2 are quite ephemeral. And there is, what they're showing us is the 3 different ditches that showed very similar in the aerial photography actually have received very different treatment. So their formation processes are very different. It looks like 3 ditches were dug. The ditch to the west was maintained and remained open for a period of time. And that's why we've got quite a nice archaeological signature and the magnetic signature there. Whereas the other 2 ditches don't appear to have been open for a great deal of time and infilled with material very, very similar to what was dug out of them. And that's why we're not seeing a particularly big magnetic response there. The area around the cricket pavilion, that was one of our main areas of interest, if you can see, there's lots of areas of really black and really white responses. This is magnetic disturbance. This wasn't completely unexpected for the area around the cricket pavilion. This tends to happen where we have metal objects in the survey area. If you look in the bottom corner here, there's a really large black and white splodge. That's the magnetic disturbance from one dog poo bin. So if we have lots of metallic objects in the area, it can actually stop us seeing the archaeology. If you look at the cricket crease, there's an arrangement of little black dots with white halos around them. That's magnetic disturbance simply from driving a piece of rebar into the ground that they tied rope between when they were reseeding the cricket ground. So, it doesn't take a lot for the data on here to be interrupted. So the area to the bottom where we can see a massive black and white splodge there's a metal shipping container there that's caused that. And the area around the cricket pavilion itself, the interference there has been caused by the pavilion itself, but the previous pavilion was burnt. So there'll be a spread of burnt material around that as well that's also causing interference. So make matters worse, at the right of the site, there's a massive grate sewer pipe running through, and we could identify that from the manhole covers you could see on the site. Sorry, I'm not supposed to call them manhole covers anymore. They're inspection hatches now. Sorry, I'll go back one. The other thing we spotted was completely unexpected was this double square feature at the bottom of the site that we think might be a possible temple. We'll come back to that shortly. So if we look at the interpretation drawing of the site, so basically the red is probable archaeology. The speckled grey areas are where we got interference from modern material. So from that you can see we've actually got quite a lot going on the site, a lot more than we're expecting to find. Because of the interference, we carried out a series of earth resistance surveys as well. So the U-shaped area around the cricket pavilion was planned from the beginning. We expected to do that as we're expecting some interference around that area. The area to the top left was just a sample area, and area around the temple at the bottom, we did at the last minute very quickly because we'd found what we thought was the temple within the gradiometer survey. So we zoom in on the geophysics around the temple itself. You can see there are some enclosures at an angle. They're actually much, much clearer within the Earth resistance survey. But more interestingly, in the Earth resistance survey, we have a sort of semi-rectangular area coming out from underneath the cricket pavilion that's of the most interest here. And this seems to be sitting within an enclosure. Crossing this is the aqueduct that muddies the waters a little bit, but I think it also shows the aqueduct was probably there before the enclosures were first dug. So if we zoom out a little bit again and have a look at what we found in context of the crop marks to the south, we can see this trackway leading up from the south on a slightly curving route, and then it takes a turn to the west and heads towards where we know the vicus is. So this supports the view that there is an entrance going through the triple ditch system within the park. I'll refrain from calling this a Roman road as there's no structural or archaeological signature. The routeway is simply defined by the edges of the enclosures on either side. So this is probably more a trackway that's developed rather than a formal route towards the vicus. If we now zoom in to the cricket pavilion and try and combine our results with the results from AOC's excavation, we can see that sub-rectangular shaped sunken feature that AOC identified continues into the geophysics. This is an area of low resistance in the earth resistance data that's marked in grey here. And that's what we would sort of expect to see in an area where there's a sunken feature. It's retaining water that reduces the resistance of the earth in there. We can see that sits within a rectangular enclosure, even though we haven't got the top of it, so we don't know exactly how big that is. Aqueduct crossing beneath it, and at the southern end of this enclosure, it seems to be subdivided into 2, possibly 3 smaller areas. We also have this blob that's surrounded by 6 what look like post holes either side of it. Currently unidentified feature, so any ideas, please shout up. Potentially a shrine or something like that. This appears in both the earth resistance and the gradiometer survey, and its alignment with the enclosure around the sunken feature would suggest there is potentially contemporary with that. So do we have, the sunken area we have there is 14 meters by 6.5 if we combined both the AOC excavation and what we've added to it with the geophysical survey. So in Britain so far, apart from this, we've got 5 other examples of Mithraeums. London 14 by 7, Carnarvon 14.5 by 6.5, Carraborough 15 by 6, Housesteads a little bit smaller, 11 by 5, and Rudchester 12 by 6. So the combined results of the geophysical survey and the excavation that AOC conducted gives us a rectangular area within the enclosure that's remarkably similar to the other Mithraeum that have been found. So supporting the fact that we probably have Mithraeum on the site that would make it the northernmost Mithraeum in the Roman world. So if we now have a look at the possible Romano-British temple, we've got 2 squares here, one within the other. The outer one, 21 meters across, the inner one, 8 meters across, and within it, there's a small feature towards the center. From the gradiometer data to the left, it appears that these are all ditch features, but when we ran the earth resistance meter over it, it looks like the inner square actually has some structural remains. The white is areas of low resistance, so this is probably foundations or in situ brickwork. So we had a look for contemporaries for this as well, and the closest in size we could find was from Caister. At Caister, there were 2 Romano-British temples excavated that were actually next to each other, and they were 19 meters for the outer one and 8 meters for the inner one. So the remains we found just at the south of the Cricket Crease, again, are very similar in size to Romano-British temples. We also have a similar site at Ely that has been excavated, and you can see that's located within an area of other buildings. These were identified as workshops. If you look on the left, the area where we've got the two square features that we think we've probably got a temple, up to the left of that, we've got a rectangular shaped probable building that's running roughly parallel with the ditches enclosing the civil settlement. If we look at the later phases of Ely, we've actually got very similar shaped and sized buildings there, suggesting we have a very similar arrangement. If we look for a parallel site altogether, we go to Housestead, so go down into England. We've got a Roman fort. To the south of that, we've got a vicus. A little bit further out than that, the other side of the Vallon, we have an arrangement of temples, and then on Chapel Hill, there's a Mithraeum. So what we're seeing at Inveresk is a very similar arrangement to what we're seeing at Housestead. So it's part of quite a commonly occurring Roman landscape. So to conclude, the aqueduct was successfully traced running across the cricket pitch. Where it goes when it goes further east is a completely different question that we'll have to consider on another day. The triple ditch system does exist, and we've seen it in the geophysical survey data. However, it appears only one of the ditches remained open for a period of time, and we probably do have an entrance into the civil settlement within the cricket pitch. It looks like the Mithraeum interpretation, AOC's original interpretation of the site, is supported, and we've added details of that with the geophysical survey. We probably also have a completely unexpected Romano-British temple sat within the cricket pitch. And we take all of these together, and we probably have what we can start to see as a Roman ritual landscape. Just off to the northwest in the gardens outside of the survey area, in the 1890s, where 2 Roman graves were dug. If you see the enclosure, sort of the westernmost enclosure, we believe this is probably an extension of that Roman cemetery, and some of the small square and slightly ended buildings in there could be mausolea or shrines. So it looks like we've got quite an exciting landscape here. Looks like we've probably found the rest of the graveyard for the Roman sites. But taken together, it's quite an interesting site. And we've approached this completely backwards. Normally, geophysical survey is done before we excavate sites. This is an example where the excavations come first and the geophysical survey is able to put that into context of what's going on in the wider area and added to our understanding of that. So just want to thank people. The list of names to the left are all the people that came out and did the hard work, pushing the cart around the field and stabbing things in the ground. So many thanks to those, and thank you for listening.